41 remote sites that basically sit along the Israeli-Egypt border. And so we'd go out there and we monitor all those soldiers to make sure they're healthy and okay. Part of it too is just interviews of all the different soldiers out there and just make sure they're healthy, they're eating right, and any symptoms. We started noticing lesions on the hands of some of the individuals out there. And they thought it was just, from scarring and, just being outside in that kind of environment. And we actually started looking at it, and we took some smears of the different scarring on their hand. We actually typed it to leishmaniasis, and we even brought it down to the genus species, which was L. tropica, and it was carried by the sandflies out there. So we knew we had to do a mitigation strategy, and then we wiped out the sandflies in those areas, which now abated the disease, and we stopped seeing that in the soldiers. And that was just a year assignment out there. So then after that, they kind of pulled me out of the field there, and I went to Public Health Center. And that's kind of our mecca where we have for public health, all different disciplines. And in that area, I was in epidemiology, disease surveillance. And so there we used a tool, a surveillance tool called DRSI, Disease Reporting Surveillance Internet. And basically all the reportable infectious diseases, they have them also on the civilian side too, through the Centers for Disease Control. The military has that same list, but we add extras to it. And so anyways, we get that data and we'd see it, coming in at a time, and we'd analyze it for any trends. So if we saw, some elevated endemic levels or anything approaching pandemic levels or any threats are out there, and then we would hone in to those places where we had it around the United States and help them or send out an outbreak team to mitigate that. So it's kind of like the background. So it has a lot of different areas that you can go through in the military, and then also from deployments in Afghanistan, where we're now boots on the ground and out in different places too, and different infectious disease. We saw polio out there. It wasn't in the U.S. troops, but it was in the Afghani population that supports our troops. We were vaccine prevented, but we had to give some boosters to people that were very close working with these individuals. And tuberculosis was a big one out there as well. So there's a lot of different settings where infectious disease background really helped out. So does that kind of answer it, Greg?
Yes, definitely, Chris. Also, whenever I saw, the CDC on the news, I always saw like uniformed personnel or even like the military was associated with kind of the pandemic response. So what interaction does your profession have like with the CDC and some of these other civilian agencies when it comes to disease prevention, mitigation strategies, or even just public health in general?
That's a good question too. And we have a large outreach and connection with the Centers for Disease Control. A lot of the ones too is because we are in settings where we could only be maybe 1 or 2 deep with our public health personnel, is having our relationships and building those relationships with the CDC is, paramount. Because one of the things is, even going back to the time in Afghanistan, is we had, those polio outbreaks too. And we were trying to reach up to our higher headquarters and kind of get some word back, is like, hey, we're kind of getting now that troops are not allowed to leave Afghanistan until they get a second booster, because they didn't know the waning immunity behind our polio vaccine that we received. And then knowing that it was endemic and around that area, we didn't want to bring that back to the States, as we've done so well of, mitigating it almost globally. I mean, it's very small pockets of the world that still have it. And so our big thing was reaching back to the infectious disease section at CDC and kind of seeing their guidance as well. And that really helped us too, just to know. And one thing we did really well back in the day is the military gave us a adult polio booster when we raised our hand and assessed to come in the military. They just knew that it wasn't completely eradicated around the world and that you might be anywhere on this planet. So someone behind the scenes a long time ago before me was very smart to say, hey, this is part of the vaccines we are going to give to individuals coming in the military, knowing that it is a threat and it's vaccine preventable. So anyways, when we started doing the homework and looking through the medical records, as we started seeing, everyone has already received an adult booster. And that was CDC's guidance. If you're going to go into an area that has an endemic threat of polio, then they would just recommend getting an adult booster because you receive the series when you're younger. But they just to protect you more, because some of these vaccines are immunologic response to it starts to wane over years. And so they would just give a booster, but we were already protected. So having that, ability to reach back to the CDC, get their guidance. And two, when you bring in the CDC, when now you're informing the surgeons that are there in Afghanistan, the military side, that brings a lot of, validity to your approach. It's not just Chris Hendricks thinking, hey, this is a great idea, but this has also been vetted with the CDC. We also talked to the World Health Organization just to see what their take was. And then we brought, everyone that we're looking at, we showed their medical records that they had an adult booster. So when you start bringing all those pieces of the puzzle together, then that was a good case of saying, no, let the soldiers redeploy home. There's no need to hold them up here in theater to get another booster. So that was kind of a good networking with the CDC.
That's wow. That's a very extensive relationship that you have with other governmental agencies, and it seems like you have a lot of obviously experience, but a lot of education goes into training to do these jobs in addition to civilian education. So can you kind of walk me through your educational background?
Yeah, sure. So with it, there's many gates you can go into public health, and their backgrounds are going to help them in many different aspects. And even public health is so broad. Even within epidemiology, we're starting to specialize in many areas, from infectious disease to chronic to molecular and genetic. There's just a list that go on. And so even with that, I started out as a biology major, and that was my background in it. And I think I was dabbling with many things within the medical realm. I wasn't really sure. And so I'll have to admit, I was on the 5-year plan, slower in undergrad. I think a lot of it was because I wasn't quite sure I wanted to go within it. I looked at dentistry for a long time, and I was actually persuaded away from that from a family dentist that we went to all the time. He branched out into forensics, and that's when I started really getting, into what he was doing. And he reminded me too. He's like, "Hey, the one that brings in the income is actually through general dentistry. The forensic side is kind of a fun side gig." And he's like, "So you want to be really into general dentistry before that would be it." So kind of switched off of that one for a while. Looked at physical therapy for a while too. I thought that was interesting. Did some internships with it, and just found out it's not quite my thing. Forensics was still there, so I thought I wanted to do pathology. I didn't know if I wanted to do kind of the PhD track to it, do more research based, or the medical side and go, for MD based. And so I started at the Office of Medical Investigation while I was an undergrad, and I worked in autopsy for 3 years in there. And so I was a morphology technician. And so within that, it was an amazing and phenomenal area too, just to see what we can, pull from the forensic data when we do these cases. And so we went through that. And then after about a year and a half, I was on a case, and we had a epidemiologist. Didn't know what she did at the time, but the state morbidity and mortality reporting is done by the state epidemiologist that is in that building. And so we had a case, and we went in there, and I thought she was one of the other physicians attending and just observing the autopsy. And so we had all the x-rays done. We, pulled blood samples. We got the fingerprinting, the photographs. Those are all done. We're still waiting on the attendee to come in. And so then I just started talking with her and seeing what's going on. And from that period, I started realizing that what she does. And she was telling me all about the job of an epidemiologist. And I was really pulled into that. I was like, wow, so you get a lot of the medical components of it, but you're not also dealing with, the morbidity side that you see all the time. And autopsy is not a clean industry by any means, and sometimes, not always the funnest place too to be. And so when I saw that, what you can learn from all the data we're pulling from the autopsies, from any of the deaths that occurred, and this was in New Mexico at the time, anything from disease or accidents or anything, there's a morbidity mortality report that's done once a year. And so she's the one that would head all that. And so then I actually started switching out of autopsy, and I started working with her as kind of internship, and I'd help out with those morbidity and mortality reporting. Then lo and behold, find out at University of New Mexico had a public health program. And so then soon that kind of switched my eyes off. And I was, by this time when I moved over to internship with her, is when I was just about done with undergrad. And so then I applied for the master's program and switched over to public health with specialization in epidemiology. It's kind of how that started. So that's one way to get in there. Now there's master level epidemiologist, and that's usually like your starting gate. If you roll back in time, maybe about 5 to 10 years ago, it was just a bachelor's to get in. And I think some universities actually have a bachelor's in public health. That was not available at University of New Mexico. Also, I'd say if you want to do public health, try to get a science-based foundation, because that's just going to help you out a lot more. If you study, because public health is very general knowledge based, and then as you go up in more education, then you'll start to specialize. So I'd say, yeah, if you have a science base, whether it's chemistry, biology, genetics, anything like that, environmental science would even be a good base for it as well. And then go into a public health program, and then you can go out and work in the field for a while, and then come back. And if you want to go, for your doctorate, and that's what I did later in time. I think I took off a couple years from master's program until I started the PhD track. And then too, you kind of want to know, like, hey, what specialization would I want to target? And you only really, I believe, know that until you go out into the field and then start finding your area that you gravitate towards. But again, you don't have to do the doctorate track, but it, I think, does help you with the job market, certain areas. And I think it also would elevate, everything's not about pay. It's really like, how you enjoy what you're doing. But the doctorate level will kind of bring in other job openings that just the master level want. So that's kind of where, I started in and was raised that way.
So it sounds like it's a lot of school, but there are different, I guess, gates, as you put it, to get to where you're at. So you mentioned like the 5-year. Biology degrees are pretty long anyway, so about 4.5 to 5 years for your undergrad for biology, and then for those who want to do the master's, that an additional 2 years, or how long is that?
Usually about 2-year program.
Okay.
A lot of them want to do internships with it, so that could slow you down a little bit because you're working sometimes part-time to full-time. And the only thing I would say with that is it really helps you get into an actual job like right when you graduate. Because I think if you just shoot right through and do the academic side, then you're not selling yourself to those markets that want to hire you when you come out. Then you're kind of blindly putting your resume out to whoever is open at the time, which isn't a bad aspect too. But for me, I would say if anything, new one coming into the field is do an internship while you're doing the study part. And so one, that gets your feet in the door to real world, what you'll be doing when you come in. And then two, if you knock it out of the park, they're going to be asking you, to come work for them. And so that worked out really well for me. And I think that's a good way to kind of learn the field. And especially if you do an internship before you even start the program, because that lets you know is like, hey, this is my life. This is what I could be doing. And again, like my trajectory changed by doing internship. I learned a lot from when I worked in pathology as well, and in an autopsy, and there's a lot of things I can take away from that, but I learned that wasn't the course I wanted to go towards, and it redirected me without spending all the time and then finding out later you're not so happy in the job that you currently have. So that's why I really recommend that internship before and during when you're in a program.
Okay, I mean that makes sense. You want to have a mixture of both education and experience as you're progressing through the career path. And it sounds like you're pretty passionate about the discipline in your job, especially in your career field. So what keeps you motivated to continue working in your profession?
So I think my big thing on it too is I think I went in for the to help people out. And I think a lot of people do in many aspects. And when you say that too, everyone thinks, oh, well, only can help people is, be, a provider, or nurse or whatever it might be. Someone said in one of my courses is the clinician and nurse are amazing jobs and they help out so many. But they also said, public health is the masses that you're looking at. You're not looking at individual care. And so they both are, I think, phenomenal avenues to protect people. And we try to get it before it's clinical. Now, it doesn't always work that way, too. And so that's why the prevention piece is, I think, public health has expanded so largely in the last, probably 5 to 10 years where it used to be. Public health used to kind of be lurking in the back. They'd be the ones that would just stop these small pockets of disease, or they would really kind of hone in on the homeless population and, control disease that was with them and take care of them. They were behind the scenes in Planned Parenthood and organizations like that. They just didn't have a large footprint, and projection to the masses. And unfortunately, I mean, you start getting a lot more notoriety in a sense because of pandemics. So I think H1N1, that was our whisper of what a pandemic can do. Luckily at the time, it had very low virulence and it was fairly pathogenic, but when people got it, they weren't that sick. And it was actually lower morbidity and mortality than seasonal influenza. So we quickly forgot about it. But that was the first one that I think really started pushing public health out into the forefront of what they do. And of course, now coronavirus, you can't escape it. And I think a lot of us are becoming minor health practitioners because how much information that we receive from news and print media, which is great, to learn a little bit about it. And that's kind of where I came in too, is I knew when I completed my master's, I felt I knew just enough to be dangerous. I had this broad stroke of many disciplines within public health, but I had no real mastery of it. That's what I felt at that level. And so when I kind of knew that infectious disease was really where I was gravitating towards. And I remember when I got our infectious disease epidemiology book still sitting on my shelf here, I read every single page of that, just slowly highlighting. And I mean, I was enthralled with it. And this book, I mean, it's a tome. It's a book of books. It's a massive read. And when I got into that course, it wasn't like having homework that you have to do. It was something I wanted to do. And so, anyone watching this too, they might find their passion. It doesn't have to be an infectious disease. Again, epidemiology has many different disciplines. And so that's the thing is, though, if you find that, then, hey, that might be something now you want to go down that road. And so that's kind of where I found mine. And it was by taking the general course load for the master's. And then when I, came up to infectious disease epidemiology, that's when I knew like, wow, this is great. I want to learn more. And that's what kind of set me on the path to the PhD program.
Wow, that's pretty fascinating, especially with all the education and training that of course you had to take, but also that you wanted to take because you're so fascinated with the career field. Now, if someone isn't quite ready to engage in the amount of education it took for you to earn your degree and credentials, what are some other related professions that people can research to gauge their interest if they're not quite ready to do the bachelor's, master's, doctorate? Maybe someone who has like a high school diploma or a GED.
So I think that's a good one too, because you're going down a road that it's going to take a long time to get to the ending of it, and you want for certain to know like, hey, did I go down the right way? And I think that kind of goes back to the internship programs as well too. I know there's many ones. Even Centers for Disease Control does an internship program over the summer. A National Institute of Health does one as well. World Health Organization, that's probably more of a foreign travel one. So again, that's going to break the bank more than some of the other places. Even the state health department, every state has one, and there's a state epidemiologist assigned to every state. And if you, like, for instance, going back to New Mexico, if I put in Google, New Mexico State Public Health Department, is it'll come up and there'll be some good, points of contacts that you can call there. And I think that's the best way, is just say, hey, I'm very much interested in public health and I don't know a lot about it. And is there any way I could do an internship, and shadow someone for a period of time? And I know that was my in to many jobs as I was going through undergrad and even in a grad school. And I would be very mystified if anyone, would tell you no, because that's what more people need to do. I think we allow Hollywood and rumors to kind of push us along tracks. We see things in the movies and and don't get me wrong, there's some neat things that are out there. Cause I remember, I think it was Outbreak was the movie when I was a little bit younger, and it had about an army infectious disease, and he was epidemiologist, and they had that. It was kind of a pseudo Ebola event that was going on, and I was like, wow, that's just fascinating. It's really neat. So there's nothing wrong with being, kind of pulled in by what Hollywood will glamorize things and show it, but see what it's really like in the day in the life of people that do that. And the biggest thing is, start, local, look at state health department. And if you want to look more at a federal level, and then, look at CDC and National Institute of Health. And those would be great avenues for summer internships, or even tell them exactly what you can do. Just like, hey, I have maybe like a month I can donate, maybe on the weekends or weekdays, and just let them know exactly what your timeline is. And, or even maybe, could I just sit down with you for an hour, and talk? That might be just good. And I think that's the best way to break into it without going too far down that road and finding out maybe, hey, this isn't for me. That helped me out so much, is just internship and talking with those that do that job.
Okay, that's good advice. So I know how like veterinarians have vet techs, people who aren't obviously veterinarians, but they're straight out of high school, or maybe they're looking to change professions, or maybe you have like a dental tech. Is there a public health tech or someone who has like a high school diploma that can help out, kind of like your assistant or apprentice?
No, that's actually a good point on there, Greg, because we have preventive medicine technicians. And so on those ones too, in the military, very common, that's one way track you can go in, and they label them as 68 Sierras. And so they're preventive medicine technicians, and they're some of our biggest, helpers with what we do. And tell you the truth is, like when you first start coming out in the military, you're more field-based. And I think that's where a lot of the fun is too, because you're out there, you're collecting the samples, you're doing patient interviews, contact tracing, all that stuff, that we see again more in movies or what's reported on the news. And so when you get a little bit more senior in the career too, then all that data that's coming back to you, so all the results from the lab and the sampling and the contact investigation and tracing and all that, that is coming to you and starting to form, your frequency and distribution of disease. So you're seeing where it's at and how now we can create a public health plan to slow down that disease. So you're kind of on that edge, more senior into it. And so the preventive medicine techs are the ones out there constantly. They're pulling that information from the field and bringing it back to you. And then many times too, they're your right hand, where you're pulling them in and you're talking about, what they saw when they're out there, and, what they collected, and, some of the environment that it's, what's going on out there. So they're huge part. And it's one of those ways too, that you could get in the field and not have to spend so much time in, the academia before you're able to launch into a career. And I've seen some of them too that actually were 68 Sierras, so Prev Med techs. And why they were doing that, they would slowly finish up their bachelor's. And what's nice with the military route is that's the only need to come in. And then now by the time you get to like captain, especially before major, so you're kind of looking at, like 8 years-ish, you want to have now your master's complete. And then in the military, we'll pay for that. And then also, if you want to do your doctorate, we have a program called long-term health education training. We offer 1 doctorate a year, so you can compete for that as well. And then we try to put in billets that need a doctorate when you come out. So like a utilization assignment. So that's way too. But yeah, if you don't want to go through all that road before you come in, a lot of them have done very well and enjoyed it by coming in as a Sierra, like basically right after high school. And then you'll get the training through the military or the state health department where you work at, or Centers for Disease Control. They probably have a track too. And then, yeah, if you're slowly working out your degree on the end, then you could even switch over to the other side and eventually come in to be an epidemiologist or just a public health professional in general.
So there's a lot of levels, everywhere from the high school graduate level to the doctoral level, and everywhere in between to have education and training to affect change with epidemiology, trace tracking, all this stuff. So that's really cool. Is there anything that you wish you knew prior to entering your profession?
You know, and I keep saying that, with like internships, and that was always my one piece of advice, anything. I don't think I came up on anything that I wasn't shown or someone spoke about. I mean, you can't predict the future of what infectious disease is going to bring. If you ask me, would I think a coronavirus would ever be our pandemic strand, I would say no. So that kind of caught me. I thought it'd be more of an influenza A type would be something that would, or more novel that we haven't seen, like again, H1N1, and that didn't do much. Those things I did not see coming. And I don't know anyone, that could really see that. But in terms of the job and what you do in and out, and the military throws some curveballs too, because, we just never know where we might be, around the world. But that was, to me, very exciting. That's why I went into that. I didn't want to just stay in New Mexico, or even working for the Centers for Disease Control. They're just United States based. They're not global like the military is, or even World Health Organization. And so that's what I knew I wanted. So they didn't teach me those aspects of global public health, neither at my school or when I was, interning. But I think that was the biggest thing of knowing what the field entails. Is, I had, a couple of years, and even as I was going through in grad school, after I stopped with Office of Medical Investigation, I moved over to Safety, Health, and Environmental Affairs. And even in that area, kind of got a little bit more taste of what the field, will bring.
That's good to know, especially those who are looking at this right now and saying, "Hey, I want to go into public health, but I really don't know where to start." So obviously internships, as you mentioned, just going up to a public health official and say, "Hey, sit down, talk with me for an hour about what you do." So that's really good advice. But yeah, that's really what I want to talk to you about today. Just kind of pick your brain about how you got into the profession, what you'd recommend to those who are interested in the profession. And overall, I think this was a really great chat and good information to put out there for those who are wanting to know more. But do you have anything else you'd like to add prior to us concluding this session today?
The only thing I kind of put in there is it's a very expansive field. It's growing rapidly. I see a huge need, even not just my opinion, but we see, even with jobs, coming up in the future. As the population increases in density and, populations within cities are getting larger and closer, infectious disease will constantly be there, and that's how it will transmit faster. And so it even shows more of a need for more public health practitioners out there. And so it's definitely a good field, because we're always kind of wondering, like, hey, we go through the program, is that demand going to still be there for those positions? And I definitely see it. And I think right now it's just starting to break out. And I think public health, not only at the state level, the federal level and the global level, we'll see a lot more, jobs come in the future. And so I think it's a great field to go into, and there's definitely plenty of work out there. So Yeah, good luck to, the approaches that anyone takes on there. And it's just an honor to kind of say what I've had, my time. And it's been a great ride. And I look forward to many years still, staying in public health. So I appreciate it, Greg.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your perspective on the field and how folks can venture into the field once they get that interest, that idea in their head that this may be something they want to pursue. So with that, I'm going to end the session today. This is Dr. Chris Hendricks. Appreciate him giving us information on public health and what he does on a daily basis. Well, thanks a lot, Chris. I appreciate it.